Hello everyone, this is Mr. McGeehan. This week I'd like to talk with you about the P word, punctuation. That doesn't look right. Let me try this. No, still not right. There, punctuation. Well, at least this isn't a lecture about spelling. Seriously, folks, mastering the fine points of punctuation seems like a tedious task. There are dozens of rules and numerous exceptions. But the fact is that a few basic rules cover most situations. Most of the punctuation rules are already second nature to you, like putting a period at the end of the sentence. So you really only have to focus on the handful of punctuation problems that you've identified as problems in your own writing. Using correct punctuation is an important part of writing well. Good punctuation helps you communicate your idea to the reader. Poor punctuation hinders communication and leaves a bad impression, somewhat like attending a formal affair dressed in sweat clothes. In this lecture, I'll focus only on commas. However, punctuation is covered extensively in Section 11 of a writer's resource, which, by the way, is a resource you should continue to use throughout your academic and professional career. You don't need to memorize all of the rules. You just need to know where to look when you have a question. So, let's talk about the comma. The most common misuse of the comma is to join two independent clauses or simple sentences. For example, in the sentence on the screen, I studied hard and I passed the test. You must have a comma with a coordinating conjunction, such as and, in order to connect two independent clauses. If you have the comma simply by itself like this, you have what's called a comma splice, which is incorrect. So always remember to use the comma in combination with the coordinating conjunction such as and. Now, some students are what I call comma sprinklers. That is, it looks as if they've loaded up a shaker with commas and sprinkled them all over the page. Believe it or not, sometimes the comma is optional. A good rule of thumb is, when in doubt, leave it out. Use common sense, remembering that the comma signals a brief pause. Try to hear the commas as you read your work. In general, don't use a comma after the word and. For example, we sometimes see this construction where the comma appears after the word and. That almost never happens correctly. Use a comma before the word and when and joins two independent clauses, as in this example. However, don't use a comma before and when and simply joins two words or phrases, as in these examples. Note here that the word and is joining apples and peaches, two words, not two independent clauses. So it would be incorrect to put the comma in down here. Okay? Now, do use a comma between items in a series. For example, here we picked apples, comma, peaches, and pears. Note that the comma can be omitted here before the and before the last item in a series. However, you will never go wrong leaving it in, and sometimes the comma is necessary to avoid confusion. So either way is correct here. Okay. Use a comma after introductory elements. For example, after a dependent clause that comes at the beginning of a sentence. Here, when I was younger, comes at the beginning of the sentence and is followed by a comma, or simply the prepositional phrase at the beginning, followed by a comma. Use a comma to set off what are called non-restrictive elements. That is, phrases and clauses that provide additional information but are not essential to the meaning of the main clause. This can be a difficult concept to grasp, but it has practical value, and the difference of a comma once actually set off a battle at the convention of a national political party. Look at these two proposals that were made for the party platform. You see that the only difference between them is the comma after the word taxes. In the first sentence, the clause, which will hurt the economy, is set off by commas, and therefore it's what's called a non-restrictive clause. The sentence makes the statement that the party is flatly opposed to higher taxes, no restrictions, then adds the reason, higher taxes will hurt the economy. But in the second sentence, the clause, that will hurt the economy, is a restrictive clause. It restricts the party's opposition to only those tax increases that will hurt the economy. There may be other tax increases that will help the economy. If higher taxes will help the economy, the party might be able to support them. Thus, you see, the comma gives the politicians some wiggle room. Do use a comma to set off speaker tags. These are words like he said, or she cried, or they laughed. Okay, indirect quotations. This rule applies no matter where in a sentence you place the speaker tag. So we see in the first example here, the speaker tag comes at the beginning of the sentence and is followed by a comma. Here the speaker tag comes at the end of a sentence in the second example, and there is a comma before the speaker tag. Should the speaker tag come in the middle, the speaker tag is set off by commas on both ends. Now, an interesting rule here is that commas in American usage always go inside quotation marks. So you see in all of these examples, or I'm sorry, rather in examples number 2 and 3, the comma is inside the quotation marks. This is an arbitrary rule, but there are no exceptions that I know of, and so it is one of my favorite rules in English, one of the few to which there are no exceptions. Do not use a comma before an indirect quotation. Indirect quotation is one in which we use a speaker tag but not the exact words of a speaker. For example, he said he was tired. The exact words of the speaker were not he was tired. The exact words would have been I am tired. So this is called an indirect quotation, and we do not use a comma before the indirect quotation. Okay? Lastly, do not use a comma to separate subject and verb or verb and object. So you see in the two examples here, this is the subject reflecting on one's life, and the verb is the word is. So we would not use the comma to separate the two. In the second example, we have the subject is Washburn, the verb is decided, and this entire clause is the object or complement of the verb. So we would not use a comma between those elements. In summary, those few rules cover most of the problem situations that you'll run into. Keep track of the errors you most commonly make and learn to apply the rules for those particular situations.